Last time, we asked a question. What happened to New York's Little Italy? We said something that surprised some people. We said, the famous people matter, but the anonymous people matter more. That is still true. The neighborhood was built by mothers and bakers and dock workers, not by movie stars. But today, we are doing something different. Today, we follow the shadows. Because Little Italy did not just produce meatballs and postcards. It produced some of the most famous Italian Americans who ever lived. Directors, actors, singers, writers, politicians, athletes. People whose names you already know, but whose streets you probably do not. So this is not a contradiction of episode 1. This is the other half of it. Because if ordinary people built the neighborhood, it is worth asking, what did the neighborhood build in return? Little Italy. The famous faces it left behind. Let's go back to the streets themselves. Not the tourist stretch of Mulberry Street, the real blocks. Elizabeth Street, Mott Street, Delancey Street. These were not movie sets. People were born on these blocks. One of them was a shoemaker's son named Joseph Barbera, born at 10 Delancey Street in 1911. Sicilian parents from Castelvetrano and Sciacca, he grew up speaking Italian at home and grew up to co-create Tom and Jerry, the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, Yogi Bear. Almost a century of American childhoods started on a Little Italy tenement floor. A few blocks away, a boy named Robert grew up on those same sidewalks. Not born there, born in Greenwich Village, but raised in Little Italy. Nicknamed Bobby Milk for how pale he looked. He ran with a street gang before he ever stood in front of a camera. His great-grandparents came from Ferrazzano, a hill town in Molise. You know him as Robert De Niro. In 2006, Italy gave him citizenship. The same country his great-grandparents left with almost nothing in 1887. And then there is the filmmaker who never really left. Martin Scorsese was born in Queens, but his family moved to Elizabeth Street before he started school. Asthma kept him off the streets and inside the movie theaters. His grandparents came from 2 small towns near Palermo, Polizzi Generosa, Cimina. In 1974, he made something remarkable, a short documentary called Italian American. He simply sat his parents, Catherine and Charles, down in their Elizabeth Street apartment and let them talk about the old country, about coming to America, about poverty. His mother even demonstrates her meatball recipe on camera. It is still one of the most honest records of what Little Italy actually sounded like from the inside. 3 men, 3 different Sicilies. Not every Little Italy face came from Mulberry Street. New York had more than one Italian world. East Harlem was its own Little Italy, bigger once than Manhattan's, and it produced Al Pacino. Born in East Harlem in 1940, raised by his grandparents in the Bronx after his parents split. His grandfather's family came from Corleone. Yes, that Corleone, the town the Godfather made famous. His father's family came from San Fratello. Pacino has said it himself. He is not half Italian, like most Italian Americans. He is fully Sicilian, on both sides. B-roll, Corleone, Sicily. Hilltown aerials. Speaking of The Godfather, the man who actually wrote it grew up even closer to the docks. Mario Puzo, born in Hell's Kitchen in 1920. Son of illiterate immigrants from a town near Avellino, outside Naples. He said he never met a real gangster in his life. Everything in that book came from neighborhood stories and government files.
The most famous mafia story in American history was written by a man who was just listening to his blog. Now go north to the Bronx, to a neighborhood called Belmont, still called Little Italy of the Bronx to this day. Unlike Manhattan's version, this one is still actually Italian. Still has the bakeries, the butchers, the social clubs. It raised Chaz Palminteri, whose own childhood on these streets became a Bronx tale. His family came from Menfi, in the province of Agrigento, Sicily. It raised Dion DiMucci, the rock and roll singer, who named his band after the neighborhood itself, Dion and the Belmonts, named for Belmont Avenue. It raised Anne Bancroft, the actress. It raised Don DeLillo, one of the most important American novelists of the last 50 years. One small stretch of the Bronx, 4 completely different kinds of fame.
Almost nobody talks about this one. Staten Island. It gave Hollywood Robert Loggia, born there in 1930, son of Sicilian immigrants, a shoemaker from Palma di Montechiaro, and a mother from Vittoria, both towns in the province of Agrigento and Ragusa. The family later moved to Manhattan's Little Italy, where Italian was the only language spoken at home. But Staten Island's real claim to history is older than any of them. An inventor named Antonio Meucci lived here and died here in 1889, years before Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone. Meucci had already built a working voice transmission device in his own home. In 2002, the United States Congress formally recognized his contribution. His house still stands in Clifton, Staten Island. It is a museum today, the Garibaldi Meucci Museum, named for the Italian revolutionary Giuseppe Garibaldi, who lived there too during his exile. One house, 2 men who shaped history, completely forgotten by most tourists walking Mulberry Street, a few miles away. Queens had its own Italian pocket too, Astoria. It gave America Tony Bennett, born Anthony Dominic Benedetto in 1926. His father emigrated from Podargoni, a rural district above Reggio Calabria. There is a story about that father, that back in Calabria, he used to climb to the top of a mountain and sing, and the whole valley below could hear him. Bennett said he only learned that story after his father died. He was 10 years old. Decades later, he founded an arts high school in the same neighborhood he grew up in, named it after Frank Sinatra.
Not everyone famous from these streets was an actor or a singer. Fiorello La Guardia, the most beloved mayor in New York's history, was born just outside Little Italy proper on Sullivan Street. His father was from Cerignola, near Foggia. His mother was Jewish, from Trieste. He kept that second half of his identity quiet for most of his life. During a newspaper strike in 1945, he went on the radio himself and read the Sunday comics aloud to the children of New York. City Hall's mayor doing bedtime stories over the airwaves. That is a very Little Italy kind of gesture. Public, loud, for everybody. And one more name for the 21st century. Fred DeLuca, born in Brooklyn in 1947 to Italian-American parents, Carmela and Salvatore. At 17, he borrowed $1,000 from a family friend to open a sandwich shop. He named the parent company Doctors Associates because he was hoping to save enough to go to medical school. Instead, he never went. The sandwich shop was called Subway. It is now the largest restaurant chain on earth.
This did not stop in the 20th century. Lady Gaga was born on the Upper West Side in 1986. Not exactly Little Italy, but unmistakably that same bloodline. Her great-grandfather came from Naso, a small town near Messina, Sicily. She has called herself, more than once, an Italian girl from New York. Her father still runs an Italian restaurant in Manhattan, named after her aunt, Joanne, who died young. the town of Nassau has offered her honorary citizenship. She has not picked it up yet. Maybe one day. So here is the pattern. Sicily gave New York Scorsese, De Niro, Pacino, Palminteri, Loggia, Lady Gaga. Naples and Campania gave New York Puzo, Durante, Barbera's mother's line. Calabria gave New York Tony Bennett and Vince Lombardi's father's family. Molise gave New York Robert De Niro's family. Puglia gave New York Fiorello La Guardia's father. Almost every region of southern Italy is sitting inside a name you already know. We said in episode 1 that Little Italy was never really one Italy. It was hundreds of small Italies pressed together on a few blocks. And maybe that is the real answer to the question we keep asking. What remains? What remains is this. Every time you watch Goodfellas, or hear I Left My Heart in San Francisco, or watch the Flintstones with your kids, or eat a Subway sandwich, or drive past LaGuardia Airport, you are touching a thread that leads back to a tenement on Elizabeth Street, or Delancey Street, or a hill town in Molise, or Sicily, or Calabria that most people have never heard of. Little Italy did not just disappear. It went to Hollywood. It went to Washington. It went to Wall Street. It went into your kitchen and your Sunday sauce. It became American culture itself. So now it's your turn. Which of these names surprised you the most? Did you already know Robert De Niro's family was from Molise? Did you know about Antonio Meucci and the real story of the telephone? And if your own family came from one of these neighborhoods, Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island, or Astoria, tell us the town in Italy your family came from. We read every comment from part 1, and honestly, that is where half of this research started. Subscribe to Not Just Pizza, where we do not just talk about Italy, we talk about where Italy went and what it became. See you next time.